As someone who loves movie adaptations and hates being grumpy, it's strange that a certain kind of adaptation makes me f***ing furious. But for a very specific reason, they feel too much like their source material. And I realize that's a crazy thing for someone who ripped Rings of Power because it
delved too greedily and too deep
beyond its lore to say, but I can explain by looking at a different collection of wizards and elves, the recent Dungeons & Dragons movie. Two of the most important things for a script to get right are its exposition and its structure, and the movie's predictably unpredictable structure broke both my brain and my spirit.
Be warned, the bridge is protected by an ancient gnomish trap.
3 hours later.
And in terms of exposition, if you took a shot every time a D&D character declared who they were, where they were, and what was going on, you would have died before its title sequence.
We're gonna take down Forge. I'm gonna show Marleman and the Elk Tribe they were fools to let me go.
And after finishing the movie, this unlikable f***ing grumpy version of myself went online and saw a lot of people loved it directly because of those two things. Specifically because they made the movie feel like the tabletop game.
She's caught in the time stop!
Time stop?
Where I was annoyed by the lethal drinking game, other people viewed it as a wink and a nod to the backstory dump that starts most D&D campaigns. And similarly, the random structure that bothered me just reminded them of the game's unpredictability.
You have successfully rubbed your balls on the sword.
And on some level, this was part of the filmmaker's goal to, quote, capture the spirit of gameplay by setting something up that the DM would have very painstakingly created for the players, and with one wrong roll of the die, it all goes to crap. And as someone who's been playing tabletop games since he was in a high chair, I understand the point, but where in real life a lucky roll feels satisfying because you know the unpredictability is genuine, what happens on screen is that when faced with an impossible bridge to cross, characters internally roll a 20, reach into their backpacks and discover they've been carrying a handy-dandy bridge crosser the whole time. But I'm torn, because on one hand, I think the only thing worse than the D&D movie is someone who would strip the joy of the D&D movie from someone else, but I'd be lying if I didn't say that praising a movie, even though it's a bad movie because it feels like a different art form, it's like if there was a movie called the Bacon, Lettuce, and Tomato Sandwich movie, and you get to the theater and there's no movie playing. They just hand you a BLT sandwich and say you can't be upset because it's a great movie if you view the movie as a sandwich. This BLT movie would ironically get a low Rotten Tomatoes score because it prioritizes the experience of what it's adapting over choices that would make the best movie. But if I'm being fair, maybe there's an integrity, or at least a specific goal these writers achieved in wanting to make work that feels like their source material, and by God, they did it. And that is how I was going to end this video, but it turns out they weren't. When I told you D&D's filmmakers wanted to convey the spirit of the game, what I didn't tell you is that a lot of what the fans interpret as the spirit is actually the filmmakers failing at what they've stated to be their larger goal. The opening exposition dump was not intended to mirror the start of a D&D campaign. It was actually the filmmakers thinking they were writing quote-unquote organic exposition. They also went out of their way to not tie their structure to a D&D campaign because they knew that would be dramatically unsatisfying, saying, quote, ultimately, the movie had to come first. You have to approach it like a movie you want to see, not what's essentially a commercial for a game. And so I think a problem with adaptations nowadays is that fans tend to mistake shitty writing for winks and nods. And I don't like Grumpy Johnny, and while I speak his profanity-laced truth about this, I refuse to be among the YouTubers who shit on things but never wipe. Wiping, in this metaphor, means offering solutions. And so I think there are two avenues that stop Grumpy Johnny Connor from ever being born. And I think the best example of the first solution is the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Its filmmakers clearly loved the books, but not only did they understand the movie had to feel different, they also accepted that purists, including Tolkien's son and possible clone Christopher, were going to be old and grumpy and English about how much they hate it. And even though that has to be terrifying, it's okay. okay. The second option is Calvin and Hobbes. One of my biggest signs of aging is that Bill Watterson is now a bigger hero to me than either Calvin and/or Hobbes. He understood that when brands expand, their identities often shrink to where audiences can't find the core that they loved in the first place. And even though Hollywood wants nothing more than to throw millions of dollars into adapting Calvin and Hobbes, a long time ago, Bill Watterson decided to keep his BLT a motherfucking sandwich, and I'm glad that he did, but if you're among the 99% of people who enjoy themselves a hither-thither staff, please don't let me be your grumpy and not English Christopher Tolkien. Except in the nice ways. From what I understand, he was mostly a lovely man. Bye.